Have you ever wondered what it truly felt like to fall asleep in the Middle Ages? Imagine a world without glowing screens, without the constant hum of traffic, without endless notifications keeping your mind restless long after midnight. In those quiet centuries when the sun went down, life itself slowed to a rhythm our bodies were born to follow. And in that silence, medieval people often found a kind of deep, restorative rest that many of us today can only dream of. Before we drift deeper into this story together, I'd love to invite you to pause for just a moment. If you enjoy calming history told in this slow and gentle way, please make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. And tell me, where are you listening from tonight? I'd love to know which corner of the world you call home as we journey back into the medieval night together. Now, let's step into that world, where the psychological rhythms of life shaped sleep in ways that science is only beginning to understand today. Imagine a world without the constant hum of electricity, without street lamps blazing through the night, without glowing phone screens keeping you awake far past midnight. The medieval world was bathed in darkness once the sun slipped below the horizon, the only light coming from flickering candles or the soft orange glow of a hearth fire. It was a world where the rise and fall of the sun dictated the rhythm of daily life, and as night spread across the countryside, the human body prepared itself for rest in ways we rarely experience today. Modern science has begun to uncover just how deeply our bodies are tied to the cycle of light and dark. In the medieval era, people woke with the first rays of sunlight, worked through the day, and as evening descended, their bodies began to produce a powerful hormone called melatonin. This natural sleep signal told the body that night had arrived, that it was time to slow down, to prepare for rest. Today we know that melatonin production depends on darkness. The more artificial light we surround ourselves with at night, the less melatonin we produce. This simple biological fact means that, in many ways, the people of the medieval world had a head start on good deep sleep before they even laid their heads down to rest. Life then was far from easy, but it was a life aligned with the turning of the earth. When the sun set, the whole world dimmed. Streets in villages fell silent. Homes relied on a single candle or the fading glow of a fire. The human eye, so sensitive to light, adapted quickly to this darkness, and with that darkness came drowsiness. Without the jarring brightness of modern lamps or the cold blue light of phones and computers, medieval people experienced evenings that were gentle, quiet, and filled with the natural cues that told the body it was time to rest. Studies today have shown just how powerful this connection is. In one experiment, people were asked to live for several weeks with no artificial lighting at all. No screens, no light bulbs, nothing but the rising and setting of the sun to guide them. At first, many of them felt disoriented, but something remarkable happened after a few days. Their sleep began to shift. They fell asleep earlier, slept more deeply, and woke with the sun feeling more refreshed than they had in years. Scientists found that the absence of artificial light allowed melatonin levels to rise higher and stay elevated for longer periods, creating the perfect conditions for restful, restorative sleep. Now imagine a medieval village in midwinter. The sun sets early and the long nights stretch on for hours. Families gather around the fire, sharing stories, mending clothes, or sitting quietly as the flames crackle. Outside, the world is dark and still. There is no rush to stay up late, no bright lamp to keep everyone awake. The darkness itself acts as a signal, a slow and steady whisper to the body that night has arrived. Within an hour or two, eyelids grow heavy. Thoughts slow down, and one by one people drift into sleep, guided only by the rhythm of nature itself. Today we often think of sleep problems as something modern medicine must fix. But in reality, our bodies are built to sleep well when we simply give them the right conditions. Darkness triggers melatonin. Melatonin lowers body temperature, and a cooler body falls asleep more easily. Medieval homes, unheated once the fire burned low, grew chilly by the middle of the night. This drop in temperature, combined with the deep darkness, pushed people into the kind of sleep modern researchers call slow-wave sleep, the heaviest, most restorative phase of rest. It is easy to forget that the electric light bulb is barely more than a century old. For thousands of years before it appeared, humans lived by sunlight and firelight alone. Our ancestors evolved with these natural patterns, and the medieval period preserved them in a way we rarely experience today. Sleep researchers now believe that much of our modern insomnia comes not from stress alone, but from the simple fact that our evenings are too bright, too noisy, and too full of stimulation. Blue light from phones and computer screens is one of the worst offenders. Studies show that just 2 hours of screen use before bed can suppress melatonin production by as much as 23%. This means the brain still thinks it is daytime, even as the clock inches toward midnight. Medieval people, of course, never faced this problem. Their evenings were lit only by the warm glow of fire, a kind of light far gentler on the eyes and far less likely to disturb the body's natural rhythms. Even the stars and the moon played a role. On clear nights, the silvery light of the moon was the brightest thing in the sky, but it was never strong enough to wake people or delay sleep. Instead, it marked the passage of time, a faint reminder of the world outside as people slept in homes with shuttered windows and thick thatch roofs. The darkness of the medieval night was complete, and it wrapped around sleeping villages like a blanket. Some scientists argue that this natural darkness also affected the timing of sleep itself. Medieval people often followed what historians call the two-sleep system. They would fall asleep not long after dusk, sleep for several hours, then wake for a short period in the middle of the night before drifting into a second sleep until dawn. Modern experiments show that this pattern appears naturally when people live without artificial light. It seems our bodies are designed for this rhythm when left to their own devices. The first sleep may have been dominated by deep, slow-wave rest, while the second sleep allowed for longer dreams and lighter, more reflective rest toward morning. All of this was guided by light, or rather by its absence. The medieval night taught the body when to release the hormones of sleep and when to hold them back. It aligned the human clock with the Earth's clock, something modern life has slowly pulled apart. Today, with lights blazing past midnight and screens glowing inches from our faces, our bodies are often confused about when night actually begins. This confusion leads to shorter sleep, lighter sleep, and the constant tiredness so many people feel. But the medieval world reminds us that sleep does not need to be complicated. It does not need expensive devices or elaborate routines. It needs darkness. It needs evenings free from harsh light and overstimulation. It needs the slow, steady dimming of the world that tells the brain, in the language of hormones and biology, that night has arrived. When we read about medieval life, it is easy to focus on the hardships, the cold winters, the lack of medicine, the heavy labor. But in one way, at least, they lived in harmony with something we have forgotten. Their sleep followed the natural rise and fall of light, a rhythm written into the very chemistry of the human body. Science now confirms what they experienced every night, that the simplest path to better sleep begins not with what we add to our lives, but with what we take away. Less light, less noise, less artificial day in the middle of the night. In the silence of a medieval evening, as the fire burned low and the darkness settled in, the body listened. It listened to the signals of nature, to the deepening night, to the slow drift of the stars overhead. And in that listening, in that surrender to darkness, came the kind of sleep we now chase with pills and glowing screens turned off too late. The medieval night offered it freely as soon as the sun slipped away. In the quiet villages of medieval Europe, where the sun ruled the day and darkness claimed the night, sleep came in two gentle waves rather than one long stretch. People then spoke of a first sleep and a second sleep, a pattern so common it appeared in diaries, medical texts, and even the advice of medieval physicians. For centuries, this way of sleeping was simply a part of life, a rhythm as natural as the seasons. Yet today it has all but vanished, leaving us to wonder whether the people of the past knew something about rest that we have forgotten. The first sleep began not long after dusk. When the sun dipped below the horizon, the entire world darkened. Candles were precious, firewood costly, so evenings were short and simple. Families gathered close as the fire burned low, speaking in hushed tones or sitting silently, letting the long day slip away. Before long, the darkness wrapped itself around the house, and the body, guided by this deep quiet and the total absence of light, gave in to sleep's first call. This first sleep lasted for several hours, often beginning well before midnight. It was the kind of sleep scientists today call slow-wave sleep, the heaviest, deepest, most restorative part of the night. In this phase, the body repairs itself, the immune system strengthens, and the mind stores away memories from the day before. It is the sleep of true physical recovery, the kind we often miss in our own restless, late-night modern routines. But then something curious happened. Sometime after midnight, people would wake, not with the grogginess we feel when our alarms drag us from bed too soon, but naturally, calmly, as though this was simply part of the design of the night itself. They called this the watch, or simply the waking period between sleeps. For an hour, sometimes two, people would lie in bed thinking quietly, or they would rise to stir the fire, pray, or talk softly with a spouse. Some even visited neighbors, walking safely through the sleeping village under the moonlight. Others read by candlelight if they could afford the precious wax, or reflected on dreams from the first sleep while the world outside remained hushed and still. Historians have uncovered countless references to this habit. A 15th century medical text recommended that the time between sleeps was ideal for study and contemplation. Diaries from ordinary villagers mention prayer said between the first and second sleep. Even literature from the period refers casually to these two phases, as though everyone simply understood that nights unfolded this way. What makes this even more fascinating is that modern science has stumbled upon the same pattern entirely by accident. In the 1990s, a sleep researcher named Thomas Ware conducted a study in which volunteers spent 14 hours each night in darkness. No artificial light, no screens, just darkness like their medieval ancestors once knew. At first, they slept longer simply because they were catching up on rest. But after a few weeks, something remarkable happened. Their nights settled into two distinct phases: a deep first sleep, a period of quiet wakefulness, and then a second, lighter sleep until morning. Ware's study revealed what medieval life had preserved for centuries. When left to its own devices, without the interference of modern lighting and schedules, the human body naturally divides its sleep into two parts. The first is heavy and dreamless, the second filled with longer stretches of dreaming, softer and more reflective. That quiet hour or two in between seems to be a natural bridge, a time for the mind to wander, for thoughts to settle, for creativity or prayer, or simple stillness. Medieval people did not find this strange. Physicians of the time even recommended it. They believed the waking period allowed food to digest properly before the second sleep began. Spiritual writers praised it as an ideal moment for prayer, a time when the mind, free from the distractions of day, was calm and open. Some scholars today think this might have been one of the only moments of privacy ordinary people had, especially in homes where families all slept in the same room. Imagine it now. A small house in the 15th century. The fire burned low, the air cool, the night utterly silent except for the soft breathing of those asleep. A man wakes after his first sleep, stirs the embers to life for warmth, and sits for a while in thought. Perhaps he whispers a prayer, or steps outside to see the stars blazing above the darkened fields. Maybe he talks quietly with his wife, sharing dreams or worries or plans for the coming day. Then, as the hour grows late, the weight of sleep returns and the second rest begins, lasting until the first pale light of dawn seeps through the shutters. This rhythm seems to have been deeply human, woven into our biology. Modern experiments show that the watch between sleeps brings a unique state of calm wakefulness. People often describe it as peaceful, even meditative. Brain studies suggest it is a time when prolactin, a hormone linked to relaxation, peaks in the body. In other words, this middle-of-the-night waking may have been one of the most tranquil times in a medieval person's day. By the 17th and 18th centuries, however, the two-sleep pattern began to fade. Historians link its decline to the rise of street lighting, coffee houses, and eventually the Industrial Revolution. As evenings grew brighter and busier, bedtimes moved later, and the long stretch of darkness that had once cradled two separate sleeps collapsed into the single block of rest we expect today. The natural rhythm of first and second sleep disappeared beneath the glow of gas lamps and later electric bulbs. And yet traces of it remain. Even today, many people wake in the middle of the night and worry that something is wrong, that their sleep is broken. But some sleep scientists believe this waking might be a faint echo of the old pattern, the body remembering what it once did naturally for centuries. Far from being unhealthy, it may be the most human thing in the world. The medieval night teaches us that sleep was once softer, more patient, more in tune with nature's signals. The first sleep restored the body. The waking brought quiet reflection. The second sleep carried dreams until morning. It was a rhythm shaped by darkness, by firelight, by lives unhurried by the glare of modern technology. Perhaps this is why so many people today, seeking better rest, are turning again to darker evenings, to warmer light, to nights free from screens and constant noise. In rediscovering the simplicity of the medieval night, we may also rediscover the calm, unhurried sleep our ancestors once knew. Sleep that came not in one restless block, but in two gentle waves, carrying them through the night like the rise and fall of a tide. As the sun rose over medieval fields and villages, life began with movement. There were no engines to start the day, no machines to lighten the burden of labor. Hands, feet, and sheer human strength carried the weight of every task. The world was built and sustained by the rhythm of bodies working from dawn to dusk, and this constant physical exertion shaped not only their days but also their nights. Sleep in the medieval era was not something people had to chase. It came easily, like a tide rolling in after a long day. When we imagine life centuries ago, we often picture knights or lords, but most people lived as farmers, shepherds, blacksmiths, or weavers. Their lives were filled with steady physical work. The soil had to be turned by hand. Wheat had to be cut with scythes swung over and over again beneath the sun. Bread had to be kneaded, wool spun, tools repaired, water drawn from wells and carried home. Every meal, every fire, every roof beam required effort. This daily labor was not frantic, but it was constant. Walking was the main form of travel, often for miles each day. Fields stretched beyond villages, and livestock needed tending even in the harshest weather. There was no sitting for hours at desks, no glowing screens keeping people still and restless at the same time. Their muscles burned with use. Their backs bent beneath work's weight, and by the time evening fell, their bodies were ready, truly ready for the heavy rest of sleep. Modern science has begun to confirm what the medieval world already lived. Physical tiredness, the kind that comes from steady movement and labor, creates the conditions for deeper, more restorative sleep. Studies in sleep medicine reviews show that people who engage in regular physical activity fall asleep faster, stay asleep longer, and experience more time in slow-wave sleep, the deep, dreamless phase when the body repairs itself. It is in this stage that tissues heal, growth hormones release, and the immune system strengthens. Medieval people reached this stage naturally, carried there by the exhaustion of their work-filled days. Imagine a farmer in the 12th century. He rises at dawn, eats a simple breakfast of bread and cheese, then walks into the fields with his family. The day is long, spent guiding a plow behind an ox or harvesting rows of grain beneath the sun. His hands are calloused, his skin browned by wind and weather. By sunset, his muscles ache, but there is satisfaction in the weariness, a rhythm as old as humanity itself. He eats his evening meal, perhaps tells a story by the fire, and when darkness deepens, he lies down. Sleep comes swiftly, pulling him into its depths before he even has time to think. This kind of tiredness is different from the exhaustion so many feel today. Modern life often leaves people mentally drained but physically underworked. Hours spent in front of computers or hunched over phones tire the eyes and mind, but do little to release the energy stored in idle muscles. The body grows restless even as the brain feels weary, a mismatch that leads to the tossing and turning so familiar in the modern world. Medieval life rarely had this problem. The body's natural cycle, work, fatigue, rest, was intact. Physical activity during the day raised body temperature, and as evening came, the cooling of muscles signaled the body to prepare for sleep. Science now knows that this drop in core temperature helps trigger melatonin, the hormone that tells the body it's time to rest. In the medieval world, this process unfolded without effort or thought. The workday ended. The body cooled. The fire burned low. Sleep arrived. Even children in medieval villages moved constantly, helping in small ways, gathering firewood, carrying water, herding geese or goats. Their play was active too, with running, climbing, and games that sent them tumbling into the grass. By the time night fell, young and old alike were physically spent. The entire rhythm of life wove motion into every hour, and night offered the only true stillness. There is another piece to this story, the emotional effect of physical tiredness. Modern psychologists note that exercise reduces stress hormones like cortisol, calming the mind as well as the body. Medieval people lived hard lives, yes, but they rarely carried stress into the night the way modern people do. Their labor left little room for the restless energy that keeps so many awake today. When darkness came, the mind quieted along with the body, soothed by the day's exertion and the natural fatigue it brought. Even the seasons shaped this pattern. In summer, days were long, work stretching beneath the high sun before harvest was safely stored away. In winter, labor shortened with the daylight, yet gathering wood, tending animals, repairing tools, and mending clothing still filled the hours. The body remained in motion, always moving toward that moment when the sky turned dark and rest became irresistible. Consider, too, the lack of stimulants. Coffee and tea were centuries away for much of Europe, and sugar was rare and expensive. Evening meals were simple: bread, pottage, maybe some cheese or ale, and then work ended because the light ended. Nothing pushed the body to stay awake. The fatigue of labor, the fall of darkness, and the natural rhythms of hunger and fullness all guided people toward the same thing: deep, heavy sleep. Modern sleep researchers sometimes recommend exercise to those struggling with insomnia, and for good reason. A body that moves, sweats, and tires during the day sends signals to the brain that night is for rest. Medieval life provided this without conscious effort. Their work was survival itself, and survival demanded motion. It is easy to romanticize the past, to imagine medieval peasants sleeping peacefully without considering the hardships they faced. Their lives were often short and filled with labor we would find exhausting. But in one sense, they possessed something we have lost: the harmony between body, work, and rest. The day spent in motion made the night's sleep inevitable, a gift given freely rather than chased through remedies and routines. When we read of medieval people falling asleep soon after sunset, of first and second sleeps divided by a quiet waking, we must remember the foundation beneath it all: tired muscles, sunburned faces, hands stiff from work. Their fatigue was honest, physical, earned in fields and workshops and along forest paths. It carried them to bed with none of the modern struggle to quiet the mind or convince the body to relax. The science of today agrees with the experience of the past. Physical exertion leads to deeper sleep, and deeper sleep heals the body in ways nothing else can. Medieval life may have been harsh, but it aligned the human body with its most natural rhythms. The work of the day ended not in sleeplessness, but in the kind of rest that rebuilt strength for the dawn to come. Perhaps that is why accounts from the time speak so little of insomnia. Night followed day as surely as fatigue followed labor, and sleep came like rain after dry soil, soaking in, restoring, preparing the world for life to begin again when the sun returned. When the sun slipped beyond the horizon in medieval Europe, darkness followed quickly, and with it came a quiet that is almost impossible to imagine today. Villages emptied into stillness. Roads fell silent. Fields turned to shadow beneath the rising moon. There were no cars, no electric hum, no distant roar of planes or trains. The night belonged to silence, and in that silence, sleep came like a tide, deep and undisturbed. The medieval world ended its day early because it had no choice. Candles and oil lamps were expensive. Firewood had to be gathered by hand. Light was precious, saved for moments of need. So when darkness arrived, work stopped. People returned to their homes. Meals were eaten, prayers spoken, fires banked low, and the village grew quiet. The only sounds might be the wind sighing through thatched roofs or the faint barking of a dog across the fields. Even the animals slept early, chickens roosting as soon as the light faded, cows lying down in their stalls. Modern nights are rarely this still. Even in rural places, there are cars on highways, the glow of televisions behind windows, the distant buzz of electricity. Our cities hum all night with traffic, music, voices, sirens, endless signs of life refusing to sleep. But the medieval night had none of this. It was a living silence, broken only by nature itself: the call of an owl, the rush of a stream, the steady rhythm of rain on rooftops. This absence of noise and artificial light created the perfect conditions for deep, unbroken sleep. Science now tells us how important this darkness and quiet truly are. Even small amounts of noise during the night can raise heart rates, disturb brain waves, and keep the body from reaching the deepest phases of rest. Studies have shown that people exposed to urban noise while sleeping spend less time in slow-wave sleep, the stage where the body repairs itself and memories are stored. Medieval people, living in villages far from the modern roar of machinery, would have slipped naturally into this deep sleep stage, free from the interruptions that keep so many awake today. Imagine a winter night in the 15th century. A single hearth fire glows faintly in the center of a cottage, its light dim and flickering. Outside, snow covers the ground, muffling every sound. The moon rises over the forest, silvering the frozen fields. A family sleeps close together on straw-stuffed mattresses beneath heavy wool blankets, the darkness wrapping them like another layer of warmth. There are no glowing clocks, no rumble of trucks on distant roads, no neighbors with televisions on the other side of thin walls. Only the deep ancient silence of the world before electricity, before engines, before modern life filled the night with motion and sound. Historians tell us that this quiet shaped medieval sleep in profound ways. With no artificial light to push bedtimes later and no noise to keep people alert, Their bodies followed natural rhythms set by the sun and moon. The deep stillness of the night allowed melatonin levels to rise and stay high, guiding people into long stretches of slow-wave sleep. This is the phase when breathing slows, muscles relax completely, and the brain itself seems to rest more deeply than at any other time. Modern sleep scientists believe it is this phase that leaves us feeling truly restored in the morning, and the medieval world gave it freely. Even the timing of village life protected this silence. After sunset, people rarely traveled unless necessary. There were no late-night markets, no 24-hour shops, no glowing cities keeping the countryside awake. Darkness made roads dangerous, so villages settled into themselves each evening. Only a watchman might move through the streets carrying a lantern, calling out the hours to mark the passage of time. His voice, faint and far away, might be the only sound on an otherwise silent night. This quiet also shaped the mental world of medieval people. Evening was a time for prayer, storytelling, or simple rest. Without the endless noise and distraction of modern entertainment, minds slowed down with the falling darkness. Today, psychologists warn that constant stimulation, phones, television, music, traffic, keeps the brain alert long after we want it to sleep. The medieval night offered the opposite, hours of stillness that let thoughts settle naturally before bed. Consider, too, the absence of artificial light piercing the darkness. Modern cities glow all night, their streetlights and billboards turning the sky pale. Even suburban neighborhoods spill light into windows from passing cars and porch lamps. Science calls this light pollution, and it interferes with our circadian rhythm, the body's internal clock. Medieval villages had no such problem. Once the hearth burned low and the moon hid behind clouds, the world turned completely dark. In that darkness, the pineal gland in the brain produced melatonin freely, signaling every cell in the body that it was time for sleep. Some modern studies have tried to recreate this darkness. People asked to live without electricity for just a few weeks began falling asleep earlier, waking less often and reporting deeper, more refreshing sleep. Their bodies responded as if remembering something ancient, something written into human biology long before modern life crowded the night with brightness and sound. Of course, the medieval world was not always silent. There were nights of storms when wind rattled shutters and thunder rolled across the hills. There were feast days when music and laughter spilled from inns and manor halls. And in cities like Paris or London, nighttime life slowly began to grow louder by the late Middle Ages, with taverns, markets, and watchmen filling the streets. But for most villages and most people, the night remained a time of quiet rest, untouched by the constant hum we now consider normal. The difference between then and now is perhaps best understood by imagining two bedrooms. In one, a medieval cottage, no lights but the fading fire, no sounds but the wind, no glow of screens or buzz of traffic. In the other, a modern apartment, a phone charging on the nightstand, headlights flashing through curtains, the faint noise of cars outside, maybe even the blue glow of a television in another room. Science shows that even if these modern sounds don't fully wake us, they keep the brain slightly alert, the heart beating a little faster, the body never sinking as deeply into rest as it should. Medieval people, surrounded by darkness and silence, slept without these interruptions. And this quiet was more than physical. It was mental, too. With no midnight emails, no breaking news alerts, no glowing screens carrying the weight of the world into their bedrooms, people went to sleep with minds as still as the night around them. They might have carried the day's worries to bed. Yes, but there was nothing new to disturb them once the fire burned low. The medieval night held them in a kind of peace we rarely feel now. A peace modern science confirms is essential for the deepest, most restorative sleep. Perhaps this is why so many people today seek darkness and silence when struggling with insomnia. Blackout curtains, white noise machines, and retreats from technology all try to give back what the medieval world had naturally. A night free from interruption, where the body can fall and stay asleep in perfect stillness. In those long-ago villages when the wind softened and the last candle went out, the night belonged to sleep. The silence was complete, the darkness absolute, and in that perfect stillness, medieval people found the kind of deep, dreamless. As evening settled over a medieval village, life slowed with the fading light. The day's labor was done, the tools set aside, the animals fed and closed safely in their barns. Smoke drifted from chimneys as families prepared their evening meals. Simple food cooked over open hearths, the flames flickering against rough wooden walls. There was no rush, no glowing clocks to measure time, no late-night errands to run. Evening followed its own rhythm, shaped by the hunger of tired bodies and the steady turning of the seasons. What medieval people ate and when they ate it played a quiet but powerful role in how well they slept. Unlike today when meals can be heavy, rushed, or taken at odd hours, medieval evenings revolved around a single simple supper. Bread baked earlier in the day might be eaten with pottage. A thick vegetable stew simmered slowly over the fire. If the family was lucky, there might be cheese, eggs, or salted fish. Meat was less common for peasants, more frequent for wealthier households, but even then, evening meals were rarely enormous feasts. The largest meal often came midday when energy was still needed for work. Supper, taken as the sun dipped low, was smaller, steadier, easier to digest before sleep. Science today confirms what medieval life practiced naturally. Heavy late-night meals can disturb sleep. Modern studies show that eating large portions too close to bedtime keeps the body busy with digestion when it should be winding down. Heartburn, discomfort, and even disruptions in sleep cycles often follow. But medieval suppers, simple and early, left hours between eating and sleep. This gave the body time to digest before the first wave of tiredness arrived with the darkness. And there was another difference too: the lack of stimulants. Coffee and tea would not arrive in Europe until centuries later. Sugar was rare and expensive, a luxury for the wealthy. Chocolate was unknown. Evening meals contained nothing to keep the mind wired late into the night. Even alcohol, usually in the form of ale or weak wine, was far less potent than modern drinks and taken mostly to make water safe, not to create late-night revelry. The result was a calm, slow end to the day instead of the jittery wakefulness that modern caffeine habits often bring. After supper, the hearth became the center of evening life. Families gathered close as the fire's warmth pushed back the chill. Light came only from the flames or a candle or two if one could be spared. Shadows flickered along the walls as people talked softly, mended clothing, carved wood, or prepared tools for the next day. Children might play quietly or listen to elders tell stories passed down through generations. The rhythm was slow, gentle, unhurried. This simple winding down acted like a natural signal to the body and mind. Today, psychologists speak of sleep hygiene, the idea that calm, consistent evening routines prepare us for better rest. Lower light, quieter activities, and predictable rhythms help the brain release melatonin, the hormone that tells the body it is time to sleep. Medieval evenings, without even trying, followed this pattern perfectly. The dim firelight, the slow conversations, the warmth giving way to cool air as the fire burned low, all of it guided people toward restfulness long before they reached for their straw-filled mattresses. Even prayer played a role. For many families, evening prayers marked the final act of the day, a moment of stillness when work, hunger, and worry were set aside. In monasteries, entire communities followed set hours of prayer, with the final service at night called compline, a word meaning completion. After compline, silence was kept until morning. The body learned this rhythm, associating the quiet after prayer with the peace of sleep. We rarely think about how much artificial light and modern distractions have stolen this natural winding down from us. Today, many evenings grow brighter rather than darker. Televisions flashing, phones glowing, cars passing beneath streetlights. Our brains stay alert long after they should be slowing down, tricked by the constant light into thinking day has not ended. Medieval people, by contrast, lived by the sun and firelight. As the world grew darker, their bodies followed, releasing the chemistry of sleep at the right time in the right way. Modern research has tried to recreate this effect. In one study, people were asked to spend evenings in only firelight, no lamps, no screens, no electric glow. Within a few days, their melatonin levels rose earlier in the evening. Their bedtimes shifted earlier, and their sleep grew longer and deeper. What medieval life did by necessity, we now must practice deliberately, blocking blue light on our phones or dimming lamps to trick our bodies back into rhythms they once knew well. And then there was the quietness of medieval nights after supper. Without news, entertainment, or glowing screens to fill the hours, evenings often ended not long after eating. People grew drowsy in the dimness. Conversations faded. The fire burned low. Some might stay awake for prayer or a little storytelling, but many drifted to bed soon after darkness deepened. By the time they lay down, their bodies were neither too full nor too stimulated, their minds calmed by routine rather than cluttered by endless information. Think of a village on a summer evening. The day's work has ended. Families eat bread, cheese, maybe some fresh vegetables from small gardens. Children laugh softly by the doorways before being called inside. As twilight deepens, houses grow quieter, only the faint orange glow of hearths showing through shutters. Soon even those lights fade, leaving the streets to moonlight and the occasional call of a night bird. One by one, families drift into sleep, their bodies guided by hunger, satisfied but not overfilled, by evenings emptied of noise and glare. We now know that diet affects not only sleep but also the body's internal clock, the circadian rhythm tied to light, temperature, and hormones. Eating earlier in the evening helps this clock stay aligned, keeping sleep cycles regular and healthy. Late, heavy meals or constant snacking after dark disrupt the process, delaying sleep and reducing its depth. Medieval life, without even intending to, avoided these problems through simplicity, routine, and the limits of the age itself. There is something almost enviable about those evenings. No rush to finish work emails, no glowing drive-through signs, no caffeine-laced drinks keeping people awake into the early hours. Just firelight, simple food, familiar rituals, and the slow settling of the body into rest. Science may only now be proving how wise this rhythm was, but the medieval world lived it every night, shaping sleep with the calm predictability modern life so often lacks. When the last candle was snuffed and the hearth cooled to embers, darkness claimed the village fully. The people lay down in homes smelling of wood smoke and earth, stomachs filled just enough, minds quiet from the soft, familiar routines of evening. Sleep came easily, carrying them through the long night until the first hint of dawn returned the world to motion once again. As night fell across a medieval village, the world grew quiet in ways that feel almost impossible to imagine today. There were no car horns, no buzzing phones, no glowing screens flashing headlines at all hours. Darkness spread slowly as the sun slipped behind the hills, and with it came a sense of closure, of the day truly ending. People carried the weight of real concerns, harvests, illness, storms. But when evening came, life itself slowed, drawing boundaries modern life so often erases. This slowing down carried a psychological power. Today we talk about stress, anxiety, mental overload. We speak of thoughts that refuse to quiet, of minds that keep turning long after the body is ready to rest. But in the medieval world, though dangers and hardships were real, the constant hum of mental noise was far less. Life offered no endless feed of news to fuel distant fears, no midnight work emails to stretch the day's labors into the night. When darkness came, people stopped. Work ended because the light ended. Anxiety had edges because life itself had edges. Modern sleep science shows just how deeply our thoughts affect our rest. High levels of stress hormones, especially cortisol, keep the body in a state of alertness long after threats or tasks are gone. The mind replays worries. The heart stays just a little too quick. Sleep, if it comes, is lighter, more easily broken. But medieval evenings carried their own quiet rituals that kept such mental storms away. Take prayer, for example. In villages and towns alike, evening prayers were more than religious duty. They were psychological release. Families recited them before bed. Monks and nuns sang them in stone-cold chapels at twilight. These prayers marked the close of the day, a turning over of troubles to something greater, a mental setting aside of worry before the night began. Today, psychologists might call it mindfulness or meditation, the deliberate calming of thoughts before sleep. Medieval people found it in whispered psalms or silent contemplation beneath the dim light of a single candle. Even storytelling, so common in medieval evenings, played its part. Families gathered by the hearth to hear tales passed down through generations, stories of saints and heroes, of animals that talked, of travelers on strange roads. These were not the endless streams of information we scroll through today, but slow, familiar narratives told in voices people knew well. They carried listeners out of their own concerns into shared imagination, where the mind could rest from the immediate weight of life. The very pace of medieval living helped too. Life was hard, yes, but it was also rhythmic. The seasons ordered the work, planting in spring, harvesting in autumn, the quiet of winter when nights were longest and sleep came early. The church calendar added its own cycle of feasts and fasts, moments of celebration followed by times of stillness. Days began with bells and ended with darkness, the hours marked by light itself. This predictability wrapped life in patterns that gave the mind a sense of order, of things unfolding as they should. Modern research shows that such regularity supports mental health. Our brains crave patterns, circadian rhythms, cues that tell us when to be alert and when to release our grip on the day. Artificial light, late-night work, and constant information blur these lines until the mind never fully powers down. Medieval life, with its bells, prayers, and turning seasons, kept these boundaries strong. And then there was the silence. True silence of the kind few of us have heard. After darkness fell on a medieval village, the world beyond the hearth lay quiet except for the wind, the creak of wood, the distant call of an owl. Inside homes, voices faded as people drifted toward bed, the fire burning low until only embers glowed. This absence of noise matters more than we realize. Studies today show that nighttime noise from traffic, airplanes, even humming electronics, triggers micro-awakenings in the brain, tiny disruptions that keep sleep shallow even when we do not fully wake. Medieval nights wrapped in darkness and silence offered conditions modern sleep researchers call ideal sleep environments: cool, dark, and quiet. But it was not just the body that rested more easily in that hush, it was the mind. Imagine lying in bed in a small timber house, the straw mattress rustling beneath you, the air carrying the faint smell of wood smoke. Outside, the village sleeps. There are no distant engines, no late-night sirens, no glow on the horizon from some city that never turns off its lights. The world itself feels asleep, and so your thoughts settle following the same rhythm, slowing until they blur into dreams. Even the way medieval people understood night shaped their mental state. Darkness was mysterious, yes, sometimes feared, but it was also accepted. It was the time for rest, for dreams, for the unknown to pass quietly until morning returned. People told stories of wandering spirits, of saints guarding sleepers, of dreams carrying messages. Night had meaning, not the blank emptiness we fill today with glowing screens and artificial noise. That meaning gave it structure, turning fear into ritual, darkness into a signal for safety and sleep. Compare that to today, when the mind rarely finds rest. We carry work into the evening through emails and messages. News from across the world arrives in the middle of the night, often alarming, always immediate. Social media keeps us scrolling through other people's lives long after our own day should have ended. Psychologists speak of cognitive arousal, the overstimulation of a brain that should be winding down. Medieval people, without knowing the term, avoided the problem by living within limits that modern technology has erased. Even dreams themselves reflected this mental quiet. Historians studying medieval dream accounts find they were often rich, symbolic, sometimes spiritual, shaped by silence, darkness, and the deep, unbroken sleep that followed. Modern people, waking often or sleeping lightly, report fewer vivid dreams. Our nights are too fractured, our minds too restless. Medieval sleepers, with long, dark hours ahead, slipped into dreams as into deep water, their minds free to wander because waking life had truly stopped. The result was sleep both longer and more restorative. Physical tiredness from labor prepared the body, but mental stillness prepared the mind. Today, therapists teach breathing exercises, meditation, screen-free evenings, anything to quiet racing thoughts before bed. Medieval people, living without our constant mental intrusions, simply followed the sun, the prayers, the firelight, the silence. Their world carried them naturally into the state modern science now tries to recreate in clinics and sleep studies. As the last prayers ended and candles were snuffed, the medieval night wrapped itself around villages and towns like a heavy blanket. People lay down in homes dark as caves, minds calmed by routine, silence, and the sense that the day had truly ended. Sleep came not as a struggle but as a certainty, carrying them through hours of darkness until morning bells returned the world to motion once more.
Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1325. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas. Your bed is a half-rotted straw mattress stuffed with bugs and hay that smells like a barn floor. Because it was a barn floor 3 months ago. There's no memory foam, no pillows, and definitely no Egyptian cotton sheets. Just a wool blanket that hasn't been washed since last winter and now weighs roughly as much as a small cow from the accumulated grime. You blink awake as the church bell clangs in the distance. It's the medieval version of an alarm clock, only louder and somehow even less merciful. Your home is a wooden hut with one room, no windows, and a charming open-concept floor plan where your family, livestock, and domestic insects all share the same space. The smell? Oh, it's a fragrant symphony, a subtle blend of stale beer, human sweat, goat, and something you pray isn't mold, but know in your soul probably is. Scented candles? haven't been invented, and even if they were, they just melt on your dirt floor. You try to stretch but immediately regret it because the air is freezing and your joints ache. You're 22 years old, which in medieval terms is roughly middle-aged. Your spine creaks like an old wooden door, and your knees sound like a bag of rocks being shaken by a confused peasant. Getting out of bed is a gamble. The floor is either wet from last night's rain, which leaks through the thatched roof, or crusty from something your neighbor's chicken did. Either way, your bare feet are now part of the ecosystem. Oh, and privacy? What's that? Your entire family, and maybe a random cousin who just never left, are waking up beside you. There's no bedroom, no curtains, no me time, just communal everything. Welcome to morning in medieval Europe, where you're never truly alone, because parasites, rodents, and 8 other people are always with you. And this is just how your day starts. It only gets worse from here. So you've managed to crawl out of your medieval haystack of horrors. Congrats! Now nature calls. And it's not calling politely, it's screaming. Here's the part where you start missing the modern bathroom. There's no toilet, no seat, no toilet paper, no flush, not even a mildly resentful plunger in the corner. In the 14th century, relieving yourself is an adventure, a social experiment, and often a small public event. If you're a peasant, your bathroom is likely a wooden bucket behind the house, which is already full because Uncle Wolfstan had a rough night after eating bad turnips. The smell is biblical. You hold your breath, do your business, and then, here's the kicker. Toss it into the street. Yes, the street. You're supposed to shout something like, "Gardy-loo," before dumping it out the window. That's Old French for watch out below, although frankly no one ever moves fast enough. Streets in medieval towns are open sewers, a charming river of human waste, animal droppings, and mystery liquids you'd rather not examine. If you're lucky enough to live in a town with public latrines, congratulations! You get to sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers in an outhouse where privacy is a myth and ventilation is a cruel joke. You might make some small talk, but try not to breathe too deeply. Toilet paper? Never heard of it. Most people wipe with straw, leaves, rags, moss, or if they're feeling especially indulgent, a scrap of wool. Sometimes nothing at all, which might explain why handshakes weren't popular yet. And if you're in a castle, surely it's better, right? Well, sort of. You might have a garderobe, a hole in the wall that drops your waist directly into the moat. Great idea, except that your enemies know this. And yes, attackers sometimes climbed in through the waist chute. Talk about entering through the back door. So, whether you're a farmer or a baron, medieval toileting is a humiliation ritual. It's cold, it's public, it's dangerous, and it's never not disgusting.
One slip on a whetstone path and you're face first in humanity's leftovers, and you still haven't brushed your teeth, but we'll get to that next. You survived the toilet. You deserve a reward, right? Maybe a nice breakfast. Something warm, delicious, comforting. Sorry, this is medieval Europe. Nothing is comforting here. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is a grim affair. There are no eggs Benedict, no coffee machines sputtering awake, and certainly no avocado toast. You sit down, or squat, near the fire to a wooden bowl of something that looks like it was scraped off a muddy boot. Welcome to your daily ration of pottage. Pottage is a thick, gloopy stew made of whatever you can find. Grains, root vegetables, maybe a few beans if you're lucky. It's been simmering in the same pot for days, sometimes weeks, and new ingredients are just dumped on top of the old ones. It's less of a recipe and more of an ongoing edible experiment. On the side, a hunk of bread so hard it could deflect arrows. It's made from coarse rye or barley flour, often bulked up with sawdust, ground up acorns, or other creative ingredients, because wheat is a rich man's fantasy. This loaf is not your friend. You don't slice it, you negotiate with it. What about drinks? You're not sipping orange juice or an oat merg latte, you're drinking beer. Yes, beer. Why? Because the water is teeming with parasites and filth. So you start your day with weak ale, low alcohol, high survivability. Kids drink it too. No one's happy about it, but at least it won't kill you immediately. Want some meat or cheese? Dream on. That's for Sundays and saints' feast days, and only if your lord is feeling generous. Most peasants don't eat meat more than a few times a year. As for fresh fruit, only when it's in season and not already fermented into wine. And don't even think about spices unless you're royalty. A pinch of pepper costs more than your monthly wages. Salt is valuable enough to be locked away. So, you chew your gritty bread, gulp your medieval beer, and try not to think about the rat that may have nibbled your porridge in the night. Breakfast doesn't energize you. It just happens to you. And now that you're properly underfed, it's time to work like your life depends on it, because it absolutely does. So, you've eaten your sad medieval breakfast, and now it's time to get dressed. Not that it'll help. Your wardrobe consists of exactly one outfit. One. It's a rough wool tunic or linen shift that you've worn every day for months, possibly years. There is no such thing as seasonal fashion. There's just wear this until it disintegrates or gives you a fungal infection. Underwear? Optional. If you're lucky, maybe a linen undertunic. If you're not, well, you're going commando under layers of scratchy, sweaty wool, all lovingly stitched together by someone who probably had no idea what a seam was supposed to look like. There's also no washing machine, no soap, and absolutely no dry cleaner in sight. So your clothes are stained, stiff, and smelt like a compost pile that's been left to marinate in a pigsty. Even if you wanted to wash them, it's not easy. You'd have to haul water from a river or well, heat it over a fire, scrub your tunic on a board with ashes or lye, and hang it in the sun, which is out approximately 3 days a year. And don't get me started on shoes. If you own any, they're made of untreated leather, barely stitched together, and offer as much arc support as a banana peel. Most peasants just go barefoot, through mud, through dung, through medieval landmines, aka sharp rocks and disease puddles. All this means one thing. Your skin hates you. You itch constantly. Fleas, lice, and bed bugs live rent-free on your body. Everyone has them. Nobles, lousy monks, itchy children, walking insect farms. No one escapes. You'll be scratching your armpit with a wooden spoon while chatting with the local priest, and no one will even bat an eye. Your skin is raw from rubbing, your scalp a battlefield of bites. And if you develop a rash, well, too bad. There's no dermatologist, no hydrocortisone, no one to tell you it's probably scabies. You just keep on suffering. And if you're lucky enough not to get an infection, great. That rash will simply accompany you for the next 6 months like an unwanted medieval sidekick. Now that you're fully dressed in itches and damp wool, it's time to flash that morning smile.
Except you don't, because in the Middle Ages, smiling is a dangerous game. Not emotionally, dentally. There's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, no floss. The concept of oral hygiene is about as popular as bathing, which is to say, not very. Some people might chew on a twig or rinse with wine or vinegar, but for the most part, your teeth are on their own. And they're not doing well. By the time you hit your mid-20s, your smile looks like something pulled from a haunted crypt. Cavities are rampant, gums are swollen, and those aren't just food stains on your teeth. That's decay. You have more rot in your mouth than a medieval root cellar. Sugar, while not yet everywhere, is becoming more common among the rich. Imported at great cost, mostly used in small cakes or to show off wealth. If you're a noble, congratulations. You get to rot your teeth faster than the peasants. If you're poor, you'll do it slowly over time with fermented bread, gritty porridge, and years of hard chewing. Toothaches? Get used to them. They're like medieval weather, always there in the background. The kind of pain that makes you consider praying, drinking, or pulling the tooth out yourself with a pair of pliers. And that's not a joke. That was the actual treatment. Dentists didn't really exist, but barber surgeons did. Yes, the same guy who cuts your hair is also pulling your molars out by candlelight with an iron hook and zero anesthesia. Infected tooth? Hope you like fevers, because without antibiotics, it can easily turn into sepsis and kill you from a toothache. That's right, The same thing that sends us to a pharmacy today could be your funeral in the 1300s. And there's no relief on the social front either. Kissing? Good luck. Halitosis, bad breath, is everywhere. If you're single, you're not judged by your smile. You're judged by your land and your livestock. In short, your mouth is a battlefield, and it's losing the war.
Now that your teeth are throbbing, let's head outside. Because your real job, the one that will break your back, is just getting started. Time to head to work. Except there's no office, no desk, no coffee break, and no chance of promotion. Your job, if you're like 90% of the population, is simple. Don't die while laboring for someone else's comfort. You're a peasant. Congratulations. That means you work the land that belongs to a lord who probably doesn't remember your name. You rise with the sun and stop only when it disappears behind the trees. Your tools? A wooden hoe, a rusty sickle, and whatever bones are still intact in your body. There's no weekend, there's no clocking out. There's only sunrise to sunset 6 days a week. Sunday is off, but only if you're harvesting, fighting off raiders, or praying feverishly for your infected toe to stop turning black. The work is brutal. Fields are plowed by hand, or with oxen if you're rich enough to afford one. You dig ditches, sow seeds, pull weeds, and carry water until your spine begins to resemble the letter S. No one cares if you're tired. No one's asking how your mental health is doing. If you're a woman, surprise, you don't just do field work. You also care for children, clean, cook, spin wool, feed animals, and pretend your husband's lice infestation isn't slowly migrating to your side of the bed. Children, they start helping out around age 5. No school, no toys, just a tiny wooden rake and a dream of one day not dying of the flu. And if you're one of the few who isn't a farmer, maybe you're a blacksmith, a tanner, or a cooper, great. You still work with fire, chemicals, or animal guts all day in poorly ventilated sheds. The pay? Basically survival. The perks? Occasional bleeding. Break a bone? Too bad. Get a fever, drink some warm beer, and keep going. You can't afford to stop, not even for a day. Because if you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, well, medieval Europe has a solution for that. It's called being replaced. So you grip your shovel, ignore the blisters, and keep digging. Because in the Middle Ages, your job isn't a career. It's a slow-motion endurance test. Now that your back is on fire from laboring in the fields, let's talk about the weather. Because in the Middle Ages, temperature is less about seasons and more about ongoing punishment from the sky.
Let's start with winter. There's no insulation, no central heating, and no weathering. Just wooden walls with gaps you could throw a chicken through. Your windows? Covered with cloth, not glass. The fire in the hearth, nice in theory, but you don't have enough wood fire to keep it going because wood is expensive and gathering it from the forest is sometimes illegal. Yes, you can be executed for picking up the wrong stick from the wrong forest. You bundle up in your one damp wool tunic, huddle near the dying embers, and still wake up with your nose frozen. Your feet? Permanently cold, often damp. Your fingers? So stiff they feel like tiny medieval popsicles. Frostbite isn't diagnosed, it's just called bad luck. Now fast forward to summer. Sounds better, right? Wrong. In summer, your home turns into a clay oven. There's no fan, no cross breeze, and absolutely no deodorant. You sweat through your layers, but you can't remove them because showing too much skin is scandalous and also invites sunburn, insect bites, and social judgment. The flies are out in full force, attracted to your unwashed body and the smell of last week's goat stew that's still fermenting in the corner. Mosquitoes buzz by your ear while you sleep, assuming you can sleep through the sound of your neighbors yelling and babies crying. In the fields, the sun bakes you. No sunblock, no hat, unless you've fashioned one out of straw like some desperate scarecrow. And the worst part, you still have to work. Heat stroke is just called taking a bad turn. So you're either shivering in your own hovel, wondering if your toes will make it to spring, or you're sweating through your only pair of socks while your thighs chafe into oblivion. And the one thing that never changes, no matter the season, Your clothes still itch, your food is still terrible, and your next job is still waiting. Welcome to climate control, medieval style. There is none. Feeling thirsty? Need to freshen up? Want to splash a little water on your face to wake up from this damp fever dream of a life? Too bad. In medieval times, water isn't your friend. It's trying to murder you. Quietly. Let's start with drinking. The nearby stream looks fresh, bubbling and clear like something out of a fantasy movie. But spoiler alert, it's not. Upstream, someone just dumped a chamber pot into it. And if not that, then a dead pig is probably decomposing in it. Parasites, bacteria, and the entire microbial army of medieval Europe await in every sip. That's why people drink beer. Yes, beer. Even children. But before you imagine medieval kids doing keg stands, understand that it was small beer, weak in alcohol, strong in survival. Brewing boiled the water, so it was safer than whatever flowed through the town ditch. Wine was another option, if you were rich enough to afford it and unconcerned with functioning properly before noon. What about bathing? Surely water was used for cleaning. In theory, yes. In practice, absolutely not. See, back then, people believed bathing actually opened your pores and let the disease in. That's right. Washing yourself was considered medically risky. You were cleaner, apparently, if you never removed the protective layer of filth caked onto your skin. Communal bathhouses did exist, but they quickly gained reputations as places for gossip, scandal, and sometimes full-on medieval extracurriculars. So naturally, the church got involved and shut many down. Even if you did want to bathe, it was a full production. You'd need to fetch water from the well, boil it over a fire, fill a wooden tub that leaked, and then pray no one else in the house used it before you, or worse, after. And rainwater? Collected in open barrels where birds poop, insects breed, and moss thrives. Sounds refreshing, doesn't it? So whether it's going in your mouth, on your body, or onto your crops, water in the Middle Ages is less of a life source and more of a gamble. One wrong gulp, and you're spending your final days sweating in a straw bed, clutching your stomach and contemplating all your life choices. Next time you sip tap water, raise a glass for our ancestors.
They didn't have the luxury of hydration without hazard. So you drank the water. Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you just stubbed your toe on a rock shaped like disappointment. Either way, you're sick. You need help. You need a doctor. Too bad you live in the Middle Ages, where medicine is really just polite torture with a theology degree. Let's start with a diagnosis. Everything wrong with you, whether it's a cough, rash, broken bone, or the creeping plague, is caused by your humors being out of balance. The 4 humors were blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to medieval science, your health depends on keeping them balanced, like some sort of internal soup. Got a fever? Too much blood. The answer? Bloodletting. That's right. Let's drain your life force into a bowl using a dull blade or a hungry leech. And yes, barbers were often doing it. Imagine getting a haircut and a hemoglobin extraction in one sitting. 2 for 1, baby. Feeling sad or anxious? That's clearly in excess of black bile. The cure? Laxatives. Maybe a warm herbal purge or just prayers and a cold compress, while everyone avoids eye contact with you and starts carving your coffin. Now, if you break a bone or get a nasty wound, you're in real trouble. There's no anesthesia unless you count passing out from pain. Surgery is done with knives that haven't been cleaned since the Crusades. Tools are heated over fire, not for sterilization, but because they just look scarier that way. Antibiotics, centuries away. Germ theory? Not invented yet. They think disease comes from bad air or God being annoyed with your moral failings. Got a stomach ache? Must have been your sinful thoughts. Hope you like confessing while vomiting. If your condition gets worse, you'll be treated with more leeches, possibly some crushed beetles, and a priest at your bedside giving last rites, just in case. At this point, they're preparing for the cure known as death.
And if by some miracle you recover, everyone just assumes God took pity on you, the doctor takes full credit, and the leech gets promoted. So yes, in the Middle Ages, medicine is less about healing and more about surviving the cure. After a long day of labor, lice, and leeches, it's finally time to eat. You shuffle back to your hovel, stomach growling, ready for the one joy left in life, a warm meal. Bad news. Your meal is probably trying to kill you. Let's begin with the basics. Food preservation doesn't really exist. There's no fridge, no freezer, just salt, smoke, or the hope that winter air keeps things fresh. Your meat, if you're lucky enough to have any, has been hanging for days, covered in flies, marinated in questionable brine, and possibly shared with a rat or two. Bread is the cornerstone of the medieval diet, but even that isn't safe. In bad harvest years, desperate peasants bulk it up with bark, sawdust, or even clay to make it stretch. And if it's rye season, there's a bonus: ergot, a fungus that causes convulsions, hallucinations, and sometimes death. It's like eating bread laced with LSD and tetanus. Vegetables? Only if they're in the season. And you know what's always in season? Turnips. So many turnips. Boiled, mashed, or floating in pottage, which, if you remember from earlier, is basically a hot swamp of mystery ingredients that's been simmering since your great-grandfather's funeral. Fruit might be available in the fall, but it rots quickly, and sugar is rare, expensive, and hoarded by the rich to show off their blackened teeth. Dairy? Another gamble. Fresh milk spoils in hours. Butter and cheese fare better, but they're loaded with bacteria. People eat them anyway because, frankly, it's either that or chew your boot leather. And let's talk about seasoning. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, or nutmeg worth more than gold. For the average peasant, flavor comes from onions, salt if you're lucky, and pain. Most meals taste like wet burlap sprinkled with sadness. But food isn't just a health hazard. It's a political one. Game animals belong to the Lord, not you. Caught poaching a rabbit, you could be fined, imprisoned, or even executed. That's right, your dinner could get you hanged. So as you sit down to eat your gray stew by flickering firelight, remember, every bite is a risk. But you eat anyway, because in the Middle Ages, food doesn't nourish. It tests you.
You've worked, suffered, and barely digested your suspicious stew. You might think the day is winding down, but don't get too relaxed, because God is watching. So is the priest, and so is your neighbor Agnes, who will absolutely rat you out if you miss Mass. In medieval Europe, religion isn't just part of life, it is life. The church controls your calendar, your laws, your education, if you can read, your birth, marriage, death, and everything in between. Think of it as your spiritual landlord, and you're always behind on rent. Every day is structured around prayer bells. The town church bell rings in the morning, noon, and night. Not because people need reminders, but because missing prayer is a sin. Forget to bow? Sin. Eat meat on a Friday? Sin. Think about your neighbor's wife and that one dream? Double sin. And yes, hell is very real. Vividly real. Priests describe it in glorious detail. Rivers of fire, lakes of boiling blood, demons with pitchforks, and eternal wailing. If the plague doesn't scare you, eternal damnation definitely will. You can't read the Bible yourself because it's written in Latin, a language reserved for monks, clergy, and that one noble kid who's too good for dirt. You rely on the church to interpret everything for you. That means if the priest says your crop failure is because you didn't pray hard enough, well, time to kneel harder. Tithes, a tenth of everything you own, are mandatory. If you grow wheat, you give wheat. If you raise chickens, you give eggs. If you have nothing, congratulations, you are spiritually bankrupt and financially doomed. Holidays? They're holy days, dozens of them. And while they offer breaks from labor, they're not for fun. They're for attending Mass, fasting, confessing sins, and reminding yourself that joy is a dangerous indulgence. Questioning the church is dangerous. Heretics are burned, witches are drowned, blasphemers are flogged, and skeptics are quickly reformed. So you go through the motions. You chant, you bow, you pray that your soul, after enduring this dirt-covered life, might finally land in paradise, assuming the priest likes you. Because in the Middle Ages, God may be merciful, but the church, not so much. If you thought being a medieval peasant was rough, try doing it as a woman. All the filth, famine, and fear, plus childbirth, subservience, and social invisibility. In the Middle Ages, being a woman is like playing life on hard mode, with no health potions and no restart button. From birth, a girl's life path is pretty much locked in. Marry young, bear children, serve your husband, die tired. Education? Not likely. Unless you're from a noble family and sent to a convent, your intellectual development stops around the time you learn how to churn butter and patch a tunic. Marriage happens early. Really early. It's not weird to be betrothed at 12 and pregnant by 14. It's not about love, it's about land, livestock, and alliances. Your opinion? Not required. Once married, you're basically your husband's property. Your job is to produce heirs, feed everyone, keep the house running, and not complain. Because complaining might get you branded a nag, or worse, a witch. That label comes with a complimentary drowning or burning, depending on local fashion. Childbirth is a death lottery. There's no prenatal care, no sterile tools, no anesthesia. Midwives do their best, but even minor complications can mean death for the mother, the child, or both. Some women survive 10 pregnancies. Many don't survive 2. But don't worry, once the baby's out, your work increases. Now you have a screaming infant in a lice-ridden hut, and you're expected to nurse, cook, clean, and still help in the fields. You don't get a break. You are the break for everyone else. If you're unmarried, you're suspicious. If you're widowed, you're vulnerable. If you're outspoken, you're dangerous. Women who didn't conform were often accused of witchcraft, especially if they had herbal knowledge, a strong personality, or just looked at someone funny on a rainy Tuesday. Even in the church, your role is limited. Nuns lived under strict rules, no speaking without permission, no freedom of movement, and your spiritual worth always ranked below men. In short, if you're a woman in the Middle Ages, you're expected to endure, obey, reproduce, and suffer in silence, ideally while smiling. Because even in a time of universal suffering, women were somehow expected to suffer gracefully.
So far, you've battled filth, starvation, social injustice, and possibly a goat. But just when you think your day can't get any worse, here comes violence. Loud, bloody, and often completely acceptable by medieval standards. Let's be clear, the Middle Ages were not peaceful. The idea of law and order mostly meant hoping the local lord wasn't in a bad mood. Violence is everywhere. In the home, in the streets, on the battlefield, in church disputes, and sometimes in line at the communal bread oven. Crime is common, punishment is brutal, and justice is more performance art than protection. Steal a loaf of bread, you could lose a hand. Accused of lying, your tongue might get pierced. Gossip too much, meet the scold's bridle. A metal mask strapped to your head with a bar in your mouth. For correction, of course. Let's say you're accused of something serious. Heresy, theft, witchcraft. How do you prove your innocence? By being tortured, obviously. Welcome to trial by ordeal. One version, you stick your hand in boiling water to retrieve a stone. If it heals without infection, you're innocent. If not, guilty. Another option, you're tossed into a river. Sink?
Innocent, and probably dead. Float? Guilty, and punished anyway. It's like a medieval game show where the prize is survival, and the host is actively rooting against you. If you're sentenced to death, that's a public event. Executions are performed in front of cheering crowds. Hangings, beheadings, burnings. Sometimes people bring snacks. It's the medieval equivalent of cable TV. Domestic violence? Completely normal. Husbands were allowed, even expected, to discipline wives and children. Street fights? Commonplace. You could be beaten just for looking the wrong way at a noble's horse. And war? Always simmering. Local feuds, territorial disputes, religious crusades. Someone's always marching off to stab someone else in the name of honor, God, or boredom. Violence isn't a breakdown of society in the Middle Ages. It is society. Everyone lives with the constant knowledge that life is fragile, justice is arbitrary, and your neighbor might bash your head in over a pig. So walk carefully, keep your eyes down, and never trust anyone with a club. At this point, you've made it through the lice, the leeches, the laundryless misery, and the looming threat of public disembowelment. But now comes the final chapter of most medieval lives, an early and unglamorous death. If you're alive and still breathing past the age of 40, you're practically a celebrity. You might even be referred to as the Old One, which is less of a nickname and more of a statistical miracle. Let's break it down. The average life expectancy hovers around 30 to 40 years, but that number is dragged down heavily by infant mortality. Nearly half of all children died before reaching age 5. Disease, malnutrition, or one bad winter was all it took. No vaccines, no antibiotics, no hope. If you survived childhood, you entered adulthood already exhausted. Work began as soon as you could walk upright, and by your mid-20s, your joints creaked like a monastery door. You might be missing several teeth, a finger, and most of your original optimism. Women faced a particularly deadly gauntlet: childbirth. It was one of the leading causes of death for medieval women. No pain relief, no medical intervention. Just prayer, hot water, and someone holding your hand while you bled out on a straw-stuffed cot. For men, the dangers were different but equally relentless. Farming accidents, infections from minor wounds, a neighbor's drunken rage, a crusade gone sideways. Even walking to the market could be risky if you crossed paths with a bored bandit or an angry tax collector. Death could also come quietly, from the plague, which turned cities into cemeteries overnight, from famine, which could last entire seasons, thinning out entire villages, or from bad luck, like eating spoiled grain and spending your final hours hallucinating and screaming at the walls. And funerals? You were lucky if you got one. Bodies were often buried quickly to avoid disease. No embalming, no polished coffins, just a hole, a few murmured prayers, and a shallow mound of earth if there was enough space left in the churchyard. So yes, in medieval times, life was brutal, short, and constantly under siege by death in all its casual forms. You didn't retire, you just stopped showing up. And speaking of exits, let's move on to your final chapter. The medieval dream dies. So how's your day been? You've woken up in filth, relieved yourself into a bucket, brushed your teeth with wishful thinking, nearly passed out from hunger, worked until your spine cried for mercy, scratched your way through itchy wool, prayed to not get plague, and barely dodged a public execution for owning a squirrel. Welcome to a single day in medieval Europe. Still dreaming of becoming a knight? Think again.
That romanticized version of the Middle Ages, gallant swordsmen, noble ladies in towers, heroic battles, and feasts in candlelit great halls, it's a myth, polished by fairy tales and fantasy books. In truth, the medieval world was gritty, cruel, and deeply unfair. Hierarchy was everything. If you were born poor, you stayed poor. If you were born rich, congratulations, you had a better chance of surviving. But you were still one bad soup away from dysentery and a hasty burial. Even the nobles weren't immune to misery. Castles were drafty stone refrigerators filled with fleas, smoke, and politically motivated marriages. Sure, you had a fur cloak and a goblet of wine, but also a 50% chance of dying in a skirmish or from an infected splinter. Not exactly luxury. The simpler times weren't simple. They were relentless. Everything took longer. Everything hurt more. Everything from childbirth to chewing came with consequences. Life was survival, not leisure. And if you did find a quiet moment to think, to dream, to imagine something better, there wasn't much you could do with it. No upward mobility, no modern medicine, no internet to Google, "What's this weird rash?" You lived, suffered, worked, and died within a 10-mile radius of where you were born. But here's the wildest part. Through all of this, people still laughed, sang songs, told stories, fell in love, and found meaning. Not because life was easy, but because humans are stubborn like that. Even in the darkest chapters, they made space for light. So tonight, when you slip into your clean bed with indoor plumbing, antibiotics, and central heating, maybe say a quiet thank you to the modern world and to your ancestors who fought rats, famine, and feudalism so you wouldn't have to.
She was born a nobody, a teenage girl with no throne, no army, and no claim to power. But through cunning, vision, and ruthless brilliance, she didn't just survive the Russian court, she conquered it. This is the extraordinary rise of Catherine the Great, one of the most powerful women in history.
Long before she was Catherine the Great, Empress of all Russia, mistress of reform and icon of ambition, she was simply Sophie. Born Sophie Friedricha Augusta von Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729, she was the daughter of a relatively obscure German princely family. Her tiny duchy in Pomerania offered little in terms of power. But Sophie herself, she had something no title could provide. Razor-sharp intelligence, relentless charm, and a quiet, burning hunger for greatness. Her upbringing was strict. Her mother Johanna was cold and calculating, not a warm, nurturing figure, but a social climber obsessed with status. Her father, a Prussian officer, was more distant than disciplinarian. From a young age, Sophie learned to walk the fine line between obedience and cunning. She read voraciously, spoke multiple languages, and learned how to observe a room before speaking in it, skills that would soon become survival tools in one of Europe's most brutal courts. When Empress Elizabeth Petrovna began searching for a wife for her heir, Grand Duke Peter, she looked beyond Russia's borders. Peter himself was of German descent, and Empress Elizabeth believed a foreign bride, pliable and grateful, would be easier to control. Sophie fit the bill perfectly. Noble blood, Lutheran faith, which she'd have to abandon, and a reputation for both grace and humility. At just 14 years old, Sophie was summoned to Russia. She arrived in the freezing capital of St. Petersburg wearing thin German fabrics and a diplomatic smile. Her mother pushed her forward like a chess piece. Sophie, however, had her own game in mind. To become acceptable in Russian society, she converted to Orthodoxy, taking the name Ekaterina Alexeyevna.
The ceremony was public, symbolic, and life-altering. She wasn't just changing religions, she was burning the bridge behind her, stepping into a foreign empire with no way back. No one watching that quiet teenage girl in a fur-trimmed coat could have predicted what would come next. Betrayal, revolution, enlightenment, and empire.
But from the moment Sophie stepped foot in the Russian court, she stopped being a pawn and began planning how to become a queen. Catherine's marriage to Grand Duke Peter was meant to secure her place in Russian royalty, but from the very beginning it felt more like a cage than a crown. Peter, heir to the Russian throne, was not the dashing prince of fairy tales. Awkward, immature, and obsessed with toy soldiers, he was far more interested in playing war games in his chambers than governing an empire or showing affection to his new wife. Some accounts even suggest he refused to consummate the marriage for years. He idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia and resented the Russian court that had adopted him. In contrast, Catherine embraced Russia with fierce determination. She learned the language, studied its history, and memorized Orthodox rituals. She wanted to belong. Peter wanted to escape. This mismatch wasn't just emotional, it was political. The Russian court was a viper's nest of gossip, paranoia, and brutal power games. Empress Elizabeth still ruled with absolute authority, but her health was in decline. Everyone knew a transition was coming, and everyone had an agenda. Catherine was watched constantly. Her letters were read, her friendships monitored, and her every move scrutinized. She couldn't trust her husband, her mother, who was still whispering in her ear on behalf of foreign interests, or even her servants. In this world, alliances could turn into accusations overnight. But Catherine was no fool. She learned to play the court's games quietly, cultivating allies in the shadows. She charmed military officers, made friends with scholars, and developed a reputation for dignity and restraint, a stark contrast to her husband's childish tantrums and open contempt for Russian traditions. Behind closed doors, Catherine began reading Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Montesquieu. While others saw her as a young consort, she was building a vision, not just for herself, but for Russia, a nation of strength, education, and reason. But there was one problem. The longer Peter lived, the longer Catherine remained in limbo, a powerless wife to a man unfit to rule. So she waited, observed, planned. She knew the Russian throne wouldn't be inherited. It would have to be taken. After nearly 20 years of waiting, watching, and quietly maneuvering, Catherine saw her moment and seized it with breathtaking precision. Empress Elizabeth had died, and Peter, now Peter III, was Tsar. But his reign began unraveling almost immediately. In just a few short months, Peter alienated the church, offended the nobility, insulted the army, and lavished praise on Prussia, Russia's longtime enemy. He reversed key policies, humiliated the clergy, and talked openly about divorcing Catherine to marry his mistress. The court, already wary of his erratic behavior, turned cold. The army, filled with generals loyal to Catherine, grumbled in corridors. Even ordinary Russians, devout and patriotic, saw Peter as a foreign puppet who mocked their traditions. Catherine, watching all of this unfold, made her move. While Peter was away at his summer palace, Catherine launched a bloodless coup d'état. Supported by key military officers, including her lover Grigory Orlov and his influential brothers, she rode through St. Petersburg in full regalia, was proclaimed Empress Catherine II, and won the allegiance of the powerful Imperial Guard. Peter, caught off guard and without allies, surrendered within days. He was taken into custody and shortly after found dead under mysterious circumstances. Officially, it was reported as a hemorrhoidal colic. Unofficially, it was murder. Catherine was now empress, not by birth, not by marriage, but by will, wit, and audacity.
It was unprecedented. A foreign-born woman with no legitimate claim had taken the Russian throne without a single battle. But her real challenge was just beginning. She had to transform that bold grab for power into a lasting legacy. Would Russia accept her? Would the nobility respect her?
Could she hold the empire together without falling victim to the same fate as her husband? Catherine understood that power gained through intrigue could be lost just as easily. She needed to rule not as a schemer, but as a visionary. And so began her transformation from a careful conspirator to a reforming empress, one who would redraw borders, embrace the Enlightenment, and redefine what it meant to be a woman in power. Once Catherine had the crown, she could have rested on her power. But she didn't. She had something bigger in mind than simply sitting on a throne. She wanted to transform Russia, not just militarily or politically, but intellectually. While Peter had worshipped Frederick the Great and toy soldiers, Catherine idolized Voltaire, Diderot, and the bold thinkers of the Enlightenment. She believed in reason, progress, education, and the role of a monarch as a servant of the people, even if she herself ruled with absolute authority. Catherine didn't just read Enlightenment philosophy, she lived it. She corresponded directly with Voltaire for over 15 years, flattering him while defending her autocracy. She invited Diderot to her court and even purchased his entire library to support him financially. Behind closed doors, she pored over legal texts, debated reforms, and crafted policies to modernize the empire. Her early reign was filled with efforts to codify Russian law. She formed the Legislative Commission, an ambitious project intended to rewrite the entire legal code of Russia. Catherine's own nakaz, or instruction, was a political manifesto in disguise, one that spoke of equality before the law, the dangers of torture, and the responsibility of rulers to serve the common good. For an empress in 18th century Russia, it was radical. But Enlightenment ideals had to survive the realities of Russia, a vast, feudal, deeply conservative land ruled by nobles who liked their serfs exactly where they were, beneath them. Catherine knew this. While she advocated reform, she moved carefully. She abolished some forms of torture, expanded access to secular education, and built schools and libraries. But she also reaffirmed the nobility's control over their serfs to keep them loyal. This was Catherine's balancing act. A philosopher queen in public, a practical empress in private. She walked a tightrope between ideology and survival, between the shining salons of Paris and the gritty politics of Moscow. Her vision for Russia was bold, but always calculated. In many ways, Catherine wasn't trying to make Russia European. She was trying to make Russia modern, on her terms. And that meant reform, yes, but with an iron hand in a velvet glove. Catherine wasn't content with reforming Russia from within. She wanted to expand it outward, to make it an empire worthy of fear, admiration, and envy. Where Peter the Great had opened a window to the west, Catherine aimed to knock down the walls. Under her leadership, Russia's borders stretched wider than ever before. She waged wars not just for defending her crown, but to reshape the map of Europe. One of her most significant campaigns was against the Ottoman Empire. These wars weren't just about territory. They were about influence. Catherine saw herself as the liberator of Orthodox Christians living under Muslim rule, and as the rightful protector of Eastern Europe. Under generals like Alexander Suvorov and Grigory Potemkin, Russia captured key regions including Crimea, the northern coast of the Black Sea, and access to warm water ports, something Russian czars had coveted for generations. These victories weren't just military, they were symbolic. With each conquest, Catherine sent a message. Russia was no longer the distant, backward cousin of Europe. It was a continental force. She also turned her gaze westward. In a series of deals and diplomatic maneuvers, Catherine participated in the partitions of Poland, carving up the struggling Polish.
By the end of the Third Partition, in 1795, Poland was erased from the map, and Russia claimed vast new lands and millions of new subjects. But Catherine didn't just conquer with armies, she also colonized with ideas. New cities were built, trade routes were expanded, German settlers were invited to cultivate Russian farmland. The empire became a mosaic from the icy Baltic to the sun-drenched shores of the Black Sea. And through it all, Catherine remained the central force, reading reports, issuing orders, and personally overseeing the shape of her expanding empire. Critics would accuse her of being power-hungry, even imperialistic. But to Catherine, expansion wasn't ambition, it was destiny. A great ruler, she believed, was measured not just by ideas, but by borders. She didn't just want to rule Russia, she wanted to remake it as a civilized empire, feared by its enemies, respected by its peers, and loyal to her alone. For all her brilliance and power, Catherine the Great was just as famous for what went on behind palace doors. And no, not all of it was whispered in libraries. Catherine's private life became one of the most talked about aspects of her reign. She had lovers, not just one or two, but a carefully curated parade of them. Many decades younger, often handsome, and sometimes politically influential. She didn't hide them. In fact, she often rewarded them with titles, estates, and pensions if they behaved well. If not, they were quietly dismissed, sometimes with a polite thank you and a promotion. Among the most important of these lovers was Grigory Potemkin, a man as brilliant as he was bold. Their relationship blurred the lines between romance, politics, and partnership. Some historians believe they may have even married in secret. Together, they shaped military campaigns, colonization projects, and the transformation of southern Russia. Potemkin wasn't just a lover, he was her co-ruler in many ways. Still, Europe couldn't look past the scandal. Gossip swirled. Satirical pamphlets painted her as lustful, insatiable, even unhinged. And after her death, the rumors only got worse. The most infamous being the completely false and grotesque tale involving a horse, spread by her enemies to smear her legacy. But why the obsession? Simple. Catherine was a woman who wielded power unapologetically. And in a world where female rulers were expected to be either saintly virgins or tragic figures, she refused to play the role. She lived, loved, and ruled on her own terms. And that made her dangerous. Ironically, while her critics painted her as immoral, Catherine herself was deeply philosophical about love and sexuality. She believed pleasure was a natural part of life, and that personal relationships didn't have to threaten public responsibility. She separated emotion from governance, a feat few male rulers managed. In reality, her liaisons were often strategic. She surrounded herself with men who were loyal, capable, and politically useful. And when they ceased to be, she let them go, usually with a smile and a generous retirement. Catherine's love life didn't weaken her rule. It was part of her strategy, a blend of passion and power that made her unforgettable, envied, and feared. This wasn't a foreign war she could win with cavalry and treaties. This was a revolt from within, her own people rising against the system she ruled. But Catherine didn't panic. She acted. She dispatched professional military forces to crush the rebellion ruthlessly. Pugachev's forces were defeated. He was captured, displayed in an iron cage, and eventually beheaded in Moscow, a public warning to all who dared follow. Afterward, Catherine doubled down on order and control. Her dreams of liberating the serfs quietly faded into silence. The rebellion had shown her the limits of enlightenment, in a country still shackled by feudalism. She now leaned harder on the nobility, who offered loyalty in exchange for absolute control over their serfs. This was a turning point. The empress who once quoted Voltaire now prioritized stability over philosophy. Reform became cautious. Surveillance increased. Rebellion, even whispered, was to be stomped out before it had breath. Pugachev may have lost his head, but he left behind a warning that haunted Catherine. That power built on inequality could only hold so long before the storm came crashing through. By the time Catherine the Great approached the final years of her life, she had ruled Russia for over 3 decades, longer than any female ruler in Russian history.
From the moment she seized power, she had defied expectations, reshaped her empire, and redefined what a woman and a monarch could be. Under Catherine's reign, Russia became a true European powerhouse. Its territory expanded by over 200,000 square miles, swallowing Crimea, parts of Poland, and stretches of the Black Sea coast. These weren't just military wins. They were strategic pivots securing warm water ports and reshaping trade. But her legacy wasn't just drawn on maps. Catherine left a cultural mark as well. She helped found the Hermitage Museum, amassed one of the greatest art collections in Europe, and corresponded with the greatest minds of the Enlightenment. Her court became a center of sophistication, art, and intellectual ambition. In a country often viewed as backward by Western Europeans, Catherine put Russia firmly on the cultural map. She modernized education, founded schools for girls, and promoted the printing of books. She introduced smallpox inoculation to Russia, even publicly receiving the vaccine herself, an act of scientific bravery in her time. Yet her reign was also one of contradictions. While she admired Enlightenment ideals, she never freed the serfs. In fact, she extended serfdom deeper into Russia's territories. Her reforms, while impressive, remained mostly top-down, designed to polish the empire without truly transforming its foundations. Still, Catherine's rule brought stability and ambition. She understood that power was not inherited, it was crafted, managed, and constantly defended. She ruled not by divine right, but by force of will, political brilliance, and relentless calculation. She was called many things: a usurper, a tyrant, a reformer, a seductress. But above all, she was effective. When she died, Russia was wealthier, larger, and more formidable than it had been in centuries. She left behind a throne secure, an empire expanded, and a legend that would endure for generations. Catherine didn't just reign, she ruled with intellect, strategy, and an unapologetic grip on history. And in doing so, she became more than an empress. She became a myth. For all her power, expansion, and enduring legacy, Catherine the Great was still, at her core, a woman navigating a man's world, and reshaping it in her image. Behind the imperial portraits and state decrees was someone deeply aware of how precarious her position was. She was not born Russian. She came to the throne through a coup. She ruled an empire that didn't want a woman in charge. And yet, she not only endured, she thrived. Catherine was never content to be ornamental. She read constantly, wrote endlessly, and never stopped learning. Her daily schedule was intense. Hours of reading reports, corresponding with foreign powers, editing state papers, and managing a court filled with rival factions. She wasn't content to simply sit on the throne. She worked the throne like a stateswoman born to it. She was also, in many ways, lonely.
She surrounded herself with courtiers, lovers, and artists, yet wrote in her memoirs of how few people she could truly trust. Her son Paul, whom she distrusted and kept away from state matters, grew into a man she feared would undo all her progress. Her greatest emotional partnership with Gregory Potemkin faded into deep friendship, but his death in 1791 left a wound that never truly healed. Catherine crafted her image carefully. She understood the power of narrative and wielded it better than most monarchs of her age. She posed as Mother of Russia, enlightened monarch, warrior empress, and lover of the arts. But beneath those roles was a woman who had endured rejection, betrayal, scandal, and rebellion, and kept going. When she died in 1796, she left behind an empire transformed, but also questions. Could she have done more to end serfdom? Were her Enlightenment ideals compromised by politics? Was she more reformer or ruler? History remembers her by the title she never gave herself, the Great. It wasn't because she was flawless or kind or just. It was because she took power and wielded it on her own terms in a time and place where women weren't supposed to have any. She didn't just wear the crown, she rewrote what it meant to deserve one.
Hey guys, you're back. Or maybe this is your first time. Either way, welcome. Tonight, we wandered gently into the life of a barber in 13th to 15th century of medieval times. But before that, I'm just going to ask that what time is it where you are? midnight in Michigan? 2 a.m. in London? Or maybe you're just drifting off in a quiet corner of Manila as the city hum fades into nothing. Wherever you are, I'm glad you're here. And before your eyes grow too heavy, before your thoughts begin to melt into dreams, please take a moment, just a moment, to subscribe, so that next time sleep won't have to wait for you to find your way back. Now then, the light is dim, the world outside is quiet, and here, tucked between the folds of old parchment and fading memory, a forgotten story stirs once more. Barber role in medieval times, 13th to 15th century Europe. In the medieval world, the term barber meant something very different than it does today. A barber wasn't simply a man with scissors and a comb, he was also a surgeon, a tooth puller, a bloodletter, and sometimes even a minor physician. These men were known as barber surgeons, practical tradesmen who worked where university-trained physicians would not. Most commoners couldn't afford or access scholarly doctors, but they could visit their local barber. He was part healer, part craftsman, often more trusted than the learned man in robes who spoke Latin and charged in silver. Step into a medieval barber's shop, and you wouldn't just find chairs and mirrors. You'd hear the scrape of a blade against a whetstone. You'd see small basins of water being warmed over a fire, cloth towels soaking, and the walls lined with tools of many kinds. There would be scissors, razors, tweezers, hooks, scalpels, and tooth-extracting tongs. And just beside them, pots of beeswax for mustaches, herbs for poultices, leeches for bloodletting, and sometimes even prayer beads. The air would smell of lard soap, cloves, damp cloth, and ash. Clients sat on wooden stools or benches, often wrapped in old linen, while others waited their turn, chatting softly or listening to local news, whispered across the blade. A barber's day began early. He would warm his razors in hot water to soften the blade. Then he'd sweep the shop floor, prepare his towels, and lay out his tools with care. The first clients often came just after dawn. Farmers needing a trim before market, monks from the abbey needing a beard shave, or even a knight requesting a cleaner cut before seeing a noble. But the barber's tasks went beyond grooming. Shaving beards and trimming hair, lancing boils and abscesses, pulling rotten teeth, cauterizing wounds, bandaging injuries, applying leeches to balance the humors, and performing bloodletting to drain bad blood. In rural villages, a barber might be the only form of medical care available. If you've ever wondered about the red and white striped barber pole, it dates to this very era. The red represented blood, the white represented the bandage, and sometimes a blue stripe symbolized veins. Outside a barber's shop, this pole spun slowly in the breeze, a signal to all that bloodletting services were offered within. The barber would tie a strip of cloth around a patient's arm, use a small lancet or blade to cut a vein, and let the blood flow into a shallow bowl. Some believed this released bad humors or cured headaches, fevers, and even melancholy. It was messy, risky, and often done without pain relief, but it was common. By the 13th century, barbers were gradually separated into two ranks in many European cities. Barber surgeons performed minor surgeries and procedures. Guild barbers focused on haircuts, shaves, and external grooming. In places like France and England, the barber surgeon guild became quite powerful, sometimes working alongside physicians, but often viewed as craftsmen, practical, hands-on, and indispensable to the poor and working class. They might set a broken bone, lance a cyst, or dress a deep cut, but rarely would they open a body or perform internal surgeries. That was left to the realm of licensed surgeons or those working under church supervision. A barber often learned through apprenticeship, starting as a young boy sweeping floors, sharpening blades, and boiling cloth. Over years, he'd be allowed to shave clients, then assist in small procedures under supervision. Tools were kept in linen rolls or wooden chests, carefully cleaned, though not sterilized by modern standards. Razor blades were honed daily. Bandages were reused, sometimes soaked in vinegar or wine to clean them. Herbs were also part of his kit. sage for infection, nettle for circulation, comfrey for wounds. Though not an herbalist by trade, a barber knew enough to mix simple salves and boiling poultices. Barbers were often well-liked, especially by villagers and common folk. They were affordable, available, and personable. Unlike noble physicians, the barber knew your name, and perhaps your grandfather's name too. He might treat you, your wife, your child, and your horse, all in one morning. Some worked alone. Others set up next to bathhouses. In towns, they might pay guild dues and operate alongside apothecaries and bone setters. In castles, barbers might serve noble houses, shaving knights, tending to wounds, and keeping hair tidy for court. In the gilded halls of medieval courts, barbers held a curious place. They were both servant and artisan, invisible yet essential. A nobleman, whether knight, bishop, or king, would not present himself to the world without the practiced hand of a barber. A clean shave, a tamed beard, or neatly trimmed hair was not merely a matter of hygiene. It was a mark of dignity, discipline, and power. And so the barber was admitted into intimate spaces, royal bedchambers, private baths, campaign tents. He might not speak unless spoken to, but he saw and heard much. Many barbers served one noble family for life, becoming trusted enough to handle the king's throat with a razor edge. A nobleman might say little to his barber, but he would not do without him. Some kings, like Henry IV of England or Louis XI of France, retained full-time barber surgeons at court. These men not only shaved and cut hair, but also treated wounds, pulled teeth, drained abscesses, and dressed the injuries of war. To be a barber in the royal household was a steady living and a respected post, but still firmly beneath the court physician in status. He wore clean robes, but not silk. He walked the halls, but behind others. He spoke softly and always bowed. In the towns, among merchants, millers, scribes, and tanners, the barber was a familiar and necessary figure, one part craftsman, one part comfort. For the townswoman with an aching jaw, he was the man who pulled the infected tooth with a steady hand. For the baker, he cleaned wounds burned by fire. For the priest, he shaved the tonsor in the back of the head, just so. They spoke to him plainly, sometimes with gratitude, sometimes with complaints, but they paid in coin and expected his tools to be sharp and his rags clean. He was not highborn, but neither was he low. He was a tradesman, a guild member, and in some cities, barbers even ran multiple chair shops where apprentices learned under their eyes. Their standing was roughly equal to a blacksmith, tailor, or baker, respectable, needed, and woven into the everyday fabric of urban life. If he worked near a bathhouse, his shop was busy. If he traveled with fairs or markets, he earned his living on the road. And if he served well, he was often repaid in loyalty and steady custom. In the countryside, where no court physicians walked and no university Latin was spoken, the barber was everything. To a poor farmer or shepherd, he was not only the man who shaved his face, but also the man who bandaged the sick child, drained the swollen limb, and stitched the wound from a harvest scythe. He was paid not in silver, but in bread, eggs, candles, or bundles of herbs. His tools were fewer, his rags are older, but his work was the same and often more intimate, more appreciated. In some villages, the barber might be one of the only men who could read or write. He might even serve as messenger, record keeper, or midwife's helper. To the common folk, he was both healer and hair cutter, but above all, present. He knew their families, he saw them, he treated their wounds in silence and gave them comfort without a sermon. No courtly thanks, no gilded coin, but perhaps a warm loaf and a whispered, "Bless you, brother." Whether standing behind a king's golden mirror, working beside a merchant's tiled bath, or crouching in a mud-bricked cottage, the barber held the same blade, steady, worn, and familiar. He asked little, he carried much, and across classes and kingdoms, he was one of the few who touched the body, calmed the nerves, and gave relief in a world of fevers and fears. He may never have worn a crown or held a seal, but he held trust. And in the still, quiet rooms of history, sometimes that is worth more than either. By nightfall, the barber cleaned his blades again, soaking them in wine or water, wiping them with oiled cloth. Bloodied rags were hung out to dry or buried. The fire in his heart dimmed. He swept the floor and counted coins, usually copper or pewter. In a small village, his work was never done. A knock at his door at midnight might mean a woman in labor, a stable boy with a gash, or a traveler with aching teeth. And in such moments, despite no degree and no title, the barber stood as healer, with blade, rag, and steady hands.
In the medieval world, before books were common and theaters were grand, stories moved with the wind, carried not by pages, but by people. And chief among them was the minstrel, the wandering voice of the Middle Ages. He was not merely a musician, he was a poet, jester, singer, and historian, a bringer of tales to those who could not read and laughter to those who forgot how. Some were called buskers, performing in streets and marketplaces. Others entertained in great halls or noble courts. But all shared one thing. They lived by the rhythm of the road and the weight of a well-remembered song. The minstrel's life was not rooted, it was one of travel. With lute on his back or drum at his side, he wandered from village to town, castle to tavern. Sometimes alone, sometimes in troops, always listening, watching, remembering. In one town he might perform in a bustling square. In another he might play for bread at the inn, or for a coin tossed kindly into his cap. His world was a patchwork of paths and people, melodies and mead. The road was his true home, paved not with stones, but with stories. A minstrel woke not with the sun, but with the stir of a crowd. He might begin his morning tuning strings or oiling a flute, rehearsing verses remembered from a dozen towns before. Daily tasks might include performing music in marketplaces or churchyards, singing tales of ancient heroes and recent kings, reciting poetry or humorous rhymes, playing instruments, lute, harp, fiddle, flute, drum, juggling, miming, or storytelling for children, composing new verses from local gossip, serving as herald or announcer in noble courts. He was part entertainer, part newsbearer, and part mirror to the world he wandered through. Minstrels told more than stories. They preserved memory. They sang of Charlemagne and Arthur, of Roland and Beowulf, of saints and sinners, of wars fought far away, of love gained and often lost. Through rhyme and rhythm they made history into song. Even battles and plagues, grief and famine could be softened in the telling. Some songs were bawdy and jolly, others are sacred and solemn, and in between were ballads, long, sorrowful tales sung under moonlight to hearts that needed them. In a time of hardship, the minstrel's voice was a gentle escape. The life of a minstrel could rise or fall with a single performance. Some were street buskers, scratching a living among traders and townsfolk. Others were lucky, hired as court minstrels, adorned in fine tunics, playing before dukes and ladies by candlelight. In great halls, they were welcomed with food, wine, and coins. Some even traveled with noble households, composing songs to mark weddings, births, or victories. But even the grandest could fall out of favor. The road was always waiting, a dusty companion for the forgotten voice. And so the minstrel learned to be both proud and humble, regal in court, ragged in the square. No university taught minstrelsy. It was learned by ear, by heart, by wandering. A young boy might follow an older minstrel, learning ballads verse by verse, practicing lute by moonlight, memorizing stories one tale at a time. Instruments varied. Some owned carved harps or fine viols, others just whistles and drums. The voice was always the core, trained to carry over wind, crowd, and clinking cups. Tools of the trade included a lute or harp slung in linen, bells on the belt for rhythm, a pouch for coins or bread, a repertoire of dozens, if not hundreds, of songs, a warm cloak, for not every night had shelter. Minstrels were both loved and overlooked.
To peasants, they were joy bringers. A minstrel's arrival brought laughter, dancing, and sometimes tears. Children followed them in the streets. Elders gave them bread for tales of yesteryear. To nobles, they were ornaments, charming but temporary, valued but never quite equal. The church viewed them warily, suspecting vanity and mischief. Some minstrels told ribald tales or mocked hypocrisy. Others composed hymns and spiritual songs, earning pious favor. No matter the view, their place was always on the edge, not quite within the circle, yet never fully outside. As twilight fell, the minstrel sought his evening's stage. A firelit inn, a noble's feast, a quiet square beneath the stars. He played until voices softened and heads nodded, and as people slept, dreaming of dragons or faraway queens, he gathered his cloak and coins, tucked his lute under one arm, and moved on. Sometimes toward warmth, sometimes into rain, but always forward, chasing the next crowd, the next song, the next flicker of wonder in a stranger's eyes. His name was rarely written, his face seldom remembered, but his voice lingered, in the melody hummed by a child, in the tale passed from mouth to mouth, in the smile of a stranger beneath the stars. He was the music in silence, the joy in sorrow, the story in song. Half poet, half vagabond, a light-footed soul wandering through history, a bringer of memory wrapped in rhyme. And though his steps have long faded, the echoes of his song still dance, wherever people gathered to listen and wonder.
In the medieval world, the art of scent was not just for pleasure. It was medicine, protection, devotion, and sometimes power. A perfumer wasn't merely someone who made people smell pleasant. He was part alchemist, part apothecary, part artisan. He distilled herbs and resins, imported rare oils, and crafted blends that might grace a queen's pillow or a bishop's chamber. Fragrance was believed to ward off illness and evil. Where filth and plague festered, sweet smells offered comfort and a sense of safety. Perfume was more than luxury, it was survival. Step inside a medieval perfumer's workshop, a narrow room, perhaps above a shop or within the walls of a noble estate. Shelves lined with glass and clay vessels, jars of dried petals, bark, gums, and wax. A still, gently puffing steam through a copper coil. Mortars, pestles, and knives laid carefully beside folded cloths and charcoal burners. You'd smell rose, sandalwood, and camphor. You'd hear the soft bubbling of oils and the rasp of a pestle grinding resin. Sometimes the air was so thick with scent it clung to your hair for days. It was a place of transformation, where rough roots and faded flowers became elixirs, incense, and oils. The perfumer rose early, for time was needed to steep, distill, and blend. He would inspect petals drying from the previous day. He'd heat oils, strain tinctures, and fan slow-burning incense over trays of spices, saffron, cinnamon, and frankincense. Tasks of the day included preparing scented oils for the skin and hair, mixing floral waters for nobility, creating pomanders, small balls of wax and perfume worn to mask odors, brewing fragrant vinegar to ward off plague, crafting incense for chapels or noble halls, sealing bottles with wax and parchment. The work was slow and exacting. A single mistake in temperature or timing could ruin a week's labor. Scent, in the medieval mind, wasn't just physical. It touched the soul.
Churches burned incense to carry prayers heavenward. Monarchs carried perfumed clothes to cover their noses during illness or war. Lovers exchanged embroidered sachets filled with lavender and thyme. Even the dead were perfumed, wrapped in scented cloths before burial, a gesture of dignity and love. And in times of plague, physicians wore beaked masks filled with herbs and perfumes, believing the fragrance purified the air. To create a perfume was to offer healing, pleasure, and protection, all from a single vial. Perfume was a treasure of the elite. Nobles paid dearly for imported resins from Arabia, roses from Damascus, or ambergris washed from the sea. Queens ordered personalized fragrances, jasmine for softness, myrrh for mystery. Kings kept perfumers at court. They prepared scents for robes, gloves, bedding, and even armor. A monarch might enter a hall trailing frankincense and civet, announcing his presence not by voice, but aroma. And in cathedrals, perfumers worked alongside clergy, scenting relics, vestments, and altars with holy blends of spikenard, galbanum, and rose. The perfumer held no title, yet he moved among princes and priests, his art inhaled in silence. Becoming a perfumer took years. A boy might start as an assistant to an apothecary or spice trader. He would learn to identify herbs by scent, to measure with precision, to heat without burning. He'd practice distillation, often over open flame, and keep notebooks in cramped script, formulas passed down like sacred texts. Tools of the trade included alembics and stills, mortars of marble or bronze sieves and cloth filters, glass droppers and beeswax seals, scales so sensitive they could weigh a single petal. He'd also study the stars, for some believed that certain scents must be gathered when specific planets ruled the sky.